much it. Thank you so much for coming once again. And today we have a really exciting talk about climate change in the tropical forest, different shades of green with Channing, but I'll let you introduce yourself as well. Take it away.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Buze, and thank you everyone for coming. So today we will talk about different shades of green. I'm Tianning Zhao. I'm a fourth year PhD student here at Harvard, majoring in environmental science and engineering. And my research primarily focuses on the impact of anthropogenic pollutions on the Amazon rainforest. And today, chemistries aside, we will talk about climate change and the tropical rainforest. So, first, I will just briefly outline what we will talk about today. We will take a closer look at a tropical rainforest in its natural state, as well as its climate impact, and then move on to the shifting trend, which is caused by the deforestation, as well as introducing some ongoing scientific research methods that we are using in the field. And then just trying to connect those two, we will talk about what we can do to make a difference in protecting the tropical rainforest. Without further ado, let's get started. Diving the first part, talking about exciting tropical rainforest. So when you're thinking about a rainforest, what would be the first thing that come to your mind? What do you know about tropical rainforest? So I have the formal definition here, which is the forests are categorized by high and continuous rainfall that occur in the tropical region. So that is the formal definition. And just feel free to type in the chat for everything that you know about the tropical rainforest. And I will just give away the two most important characteristics about the two most important characteristics about a tropical rainforest, which is also given in the name. So it's just hot and wet. In the tropical region, the average temperature annually is above 18 degrees C, so it's extremely hot. And it's also very humid with large amount of rainfall, and sometimes could go up to 33 feet per year, and which is about 10 times higher than the rainfall we have here in the Boston area. And you can find the tropical rainforest along the equator in different continents, including South America, Central Africa, as well as Southeast Asia. And today we will talk about the biggest rainforest in the world in the Amazon region. So the Amazon biome is the home to the world's biggest rainforest. It is the area which is outlined by the yellow here in South America. And for the biome, for people who are not familiar with the ecosystem, biome is simply a collection of plants and animals that have common characteristics for the environment they exist in. And we have already know the common characteristics, which is extremely hot and extremely wet. And for this vast region, spans across 3 million square miles, covering about 40% of the South American continent. So it's really a big area. And of those places, of those area, about 80% of the Amazon biome is covered by rainforest. So no wonder it has the biggest rainforest in the world. And let's do some comparison to make it in a more intuitive sense in terms of how big it is. So the biome Amazon rainforest is ranked as the number one and is actually larger than the second and third largest rainforest in the world, which is in Congo and Indonesia, respectively. And for people who are living in the US, I thought a comparison with the United States would be helpful. So I looked it up, and the Amazon biome is about the same size as a 48 continuous United States, excluding Alaska and Hawaii. So it's really a vast region. And what makes it even more fascinating for anyone who are interested in the animals, plants, is that it is an extremely biologically diverse habitat, covering about 5% of the Earth's land surface. It is the home to more than 35% of known species on the Earth. And since we're looking at different shades of green here, we're primarily focusing on the plants. And by comparing that to what we have here in US, we have different landscapes. So we have deserts, we have rainforest, we even have rainforest here, but we have about 17,000 plant species here in the United States. But in Amazon, um, at about the same size of the area, we have more than 80,000 plant species. They contribute to the different shades of green, not only fascinating to the eyes or the camera, but also the benefits of such biodiversity extend way beyond the rainforest boundaries. It basically penetrates through almost every aspect of our daily life. If you're thinking about food and drinks, the tropical fruits, the different spices, and the nuts, they were all coming from, or originally coming from, the tropical rainforest. And one specific nut, which is called the Brazil nut, is native to the Amazon region. It doesn't only provide those like massive health benefits, it also works wonder on our skin. So it's also used in the personal care products. You can find it in the moisturizers or the shampoo. And except for the Brazil nut, coconut oil, palm oil, and all kinds of things, they will find it in the personal care products. So the rainforest, the tropical rainforest in particular, it doesn't only provide this tasty food and the coffee, tea, and drinks, and makes us smell good, but also it could save lives. Nowadays, about like more than 25% of the drugs used by the modern medicines are extracted from the plant compounds. And in the Amazon region, drugs or effective compounds of the drugs have been found to treat leukemia, malaria, and cancer, and many other diseases. So it's really beneficial to every single one of us. And as an atmospheric scientist, for myself, we are interested in the tropical rainforest region for a specific reason, because they play an important role in regulating the global climate. So I summarized three major pathways that the tropical rainforest would interact with the global climate through the carbon reservoir, serving as a weather engine, as well as a washing machine. So we will look at them one by one. For the first one, the carbon reservoir. So we've all known from elementary school that the plants go through this photosynthesis process where it breathe in CO2 and produce oxygen. So over the past millions of years, Amazon rainforest existed there on the earth, and they have been taking in the carbon all the time. And nowadays, it has about 100 billion tons of carbon stored in the living plants in Amazon biome. And then there is another 160 billion tons of carbon stored in the soil. And adding them up, that is about 1/3 as much carbon as what we have in the Earth's atmosphere today. So given the magnitude of this carbon reservoir, it is clear that the tropical forest in general, and the Amazon rainforest in particular, of course, because it's the biggest, have the potential to play an important role in climate change because of their potential to gain or lose large amount of carbon as a result of land use or climate change or other reasons. So it's a giant carbon reservoir that we cannot risk leaking. So that's enough about the carbon reservoir, and now let's move on to the weather engine. This is my favorite part, actually. The rainforest provides the fuel for this weather engine globally, and the fuel here is not gas or like any fossil fuels, it's the water vapor. So in the Amazon rainforest, the water vapor are released from two processes from the ground to the atmosphere, including the evaporation and the transpiration. So the evaporation, it's simple to understand. Anywhere when you have a water surface, whether it's a pond or a river or an ocean, you would have evaporation happening. And for this transpiration process, just in case people are not familiar with this, transpiration is the process where the water moves through a plant and then got evaporated through the aerial parts, such as the stomata on the back of the leaves. So it basically moves the water under the ground to the atmosphere. And because of the massive amount of trees, about 3 billion trees, living in the Amazon region, this transpiration process is very effective in terms of this water vapor transportation. And once we got those water vapor in the atmosphere, they would go higher up to the atmosphere and got condensed into liquid water droplets. And then they will be stored in the atmosphere in the form of clouds. When the clouds got very heavy, they would rain down through a process we all know as precipitation. But those clouds, what makes it interesting beyond the Amazon region is that those clouds are not a settler. Actually, they are quite a bit a traveling enthusiast. They could travel hundreds of miles away from the origin and then rain down over there. So that is why the Amazon region, the Amazon rainforest also plays such an important role in the regional climate regulation through this transport of the water vapor. And together with the water vapor, it also carries the heat, the energy with it together. And that regulates the regional climate beyond this Amazon region. So the next thing is about washing machine. And here we will talk about the cleansing mechanisms of the atmosphere, which is also strengthened in its and found in its strongest suit in the tropical rainforest. So through different human activities like transportation, manufacturing, as well as other nature activities such as the volcano eruptions, we've got all kinds of air pollutants into the atmosphere. And if we don't have a proper cleansing mechanism, they will kind of just accumulate and the concentration will go up, and at one point we would all be poisoned. But that is not happening because we've got sufficient cleansing mechanism happening with the atmospheric oxidants, which is just the oxygen, the ozone, the hydroxyl radicals. They would react with the air pollutants and turn them into less toxic or like more water soluble, which could then be washed out by the rain. And that's why we're living in an atmosphere that is still okay, although we're emitting all kinds of problems, all kinds of pollutions into the atmosphere. And the magic of water vapor and sunlight is what produce those atmospheric oxidants, more specifically the ozone and hydroxyl radicals. It plays an important role as a strong oxidizing power in the atmosphere. And the production of such things, and those two requirements, the sunlight or the UV radiation and the water vapor, are present in generous quantities in the tropics. So it comes as no surprise that the tropics are the regions in which large fractions of many atmospheric trace air pollutants, including the carbon monoxide and methane, are eliminated. So we've got a really quick overview of the major pathways through which the tropical rainforest would affect global climate by serving as a carbon reservoir, functioning as a weather engine, as well as a washing machine. And this is not a one-way road. Vice versa, climate change is also changing the tropical rainforests to a great amount. So the tropical rainforest is experiencing this stress from the climate change, just as everywhere else in the world. We have talked about in its original state, it supplies a great amount of water vapor and then take in the CO2. It has plenty of rainfall, everything is great. But when the climate change hits, we are gonna expect this like rising temperature as well as more often extreme events such as the severe droughts. And all those things is drying up the rainforest, and thus we're expecting more wildfires happening, and those burning process would release massive amount of CO2 back into the atmosphere. And also this drying process shrink the supply for the water vapor, which will then lead to less rainfall in those regions as well. So in the past 15 minutes or so, we have been looking through different aspects. We appreciated the great biodiversity in the Amazon, and which contributed to the natural shades of green. It's perfect to eyes, perfect to camera, and perfect to our daily life. And we also know that the Amazon interacts with the global climate by serving as a carbon reservoir, a weather engine, as well as a washing machine. So we know that it can do all kinds of magic. And I will just wrap up here for the first part and answering any questions you have before we move on to the shifting caused by deforestation.
Thank you so much. We already have some questions getting in, but if you have questions, please type them in the chat, either on YouTube or on Zoom, while I start getting into some of them that we've already got. One question is, you mentioned there was like carbon in the soil and carbon in the trees. Where does the carbon in the soil come from? Is it from dead trees?
Yes. So you can consider that as the fossil fuels. It's the same story as the fossil fuels that we would have. So from the dead trees, and they would go back to the soil, and that's a part of the carbon source, or the carbon that contributes to part of the carbon reservoir in the soil, but also kind of other types of things, the other microbes and the dead trees that leave maybe from millions of years ago, and that would contribute to the carbon reservoir in the soil as well.
Awesome. Okay. Another question we have is, without the Amazon being a weather engine, would Boston get hotter, colder, wetter?
That's a very good question. So like for this like a weather engine concept, we will touch on that in the third part. Actually, we will talk about when we don't have this Amazon rainforest, what is going to happen to the entire world, and mainly what would differ is that about the rainfall, because it supplies this massive amount of water vapor, and at this moment it mainly affects what the most direct effect was found in South America. But for people living in the Boston, I guess if we were completely running out of, if the Amazon rainforest is completely gone, the heat that is absorbed by the tropical region cannot be distributed evenly across the world. So from that part, maybe this global warming is not exactly the true. It is gonna be extremely intense in the tropical region, but in the Boston area, I don't know, maybe we will have even less heat because the tropical region are not functioning this weather engine and pumping all the water vapor together with the latent heat stored in those water vapor to other parts of the world. And in terms of which direction, whether it's like hotter, cooler, I guess there is like a great controversial, like there is a great controversy within the science community in terms of which direction to what magnitude the climate change would happen. But what I could ensure you is that there will be more extreme events happening without this like the typical functioning weather engine working.
Awesome. I guess this next question kind of relates to it. Does the oxidants in the Amazon clean up the air pollutants on other sides of the world, or is the effect more local?
For that's also a very good question. And so for this thing, I think it depends on what type of air pollutants you're talking about, whether it is like a long-lived air pollutants such as the methane or the CO, or you're talking about more like a short-term air pollutants like the different kinds of volatile organic compounds. For those like short-lived air pollutants, they are usually cleaned in local area. For example, if we're emitting some kind of like VOCs like benzene or toluene into the atmosphere here in Boston, they will be very likely to cleaned within the Massachusetts. But in terms of the methane or the CO that are emitted, which tends to have a longer lifetime in the atmosphere, and they will travel around the world, sometimes even cross the equator, across the hemisphere. And those things are what were found to be eliminated in vast amount in those tropical regions. So, so I guess the answer to that question is part of that is cleaned local, and part of that is cleaned globally. And the Amazon region, because of its abundance in the in this kind of like the water vapor as well as this like sunshine or solar radiation, they could help clean those long-lived air pollutants. They could help with this like cleaning for the global long-lived air pollutants.
That's super cool.
Wow, thank you. We have another question which might transition us well to your next section, actually. One of our YouTube watchers is asking, if there are wildfires that destroy parts of a rainforest, can the forest recover? And if so, how long would that take?
Yeah, that is a pretty good transition for the next part where we will basically just talking about this like deforestation as well as the fires. So in terms of the exact time when this like secondary forest would grow after the burning down, um, I don't have an exact number. I guess sometimes, but what I do know is that from the papers I read before, people found like people studying this like carbon cycles, what they found is that those secondary forests, they could grow maybe like grow up as trees in like 10 to 20 years, but in their early 10 to 20 years, their ability to take in the carbon dioxide is not as strong as the mature rainforest. So yeah. Right. So let's get started. So in the first part, we talked about tropical rainforests in its natural state as well as the climate impacts. And next, we will move on to this like a shifting trend happening in the Amazon rainforest, in the tropical rainforest, which is caused by the deforestation, as well as have a peek at what are some ongoing scientific research that is helping to understand this shifting trend and the interaction. So talking about deforestation, this is a process where the trees are permanently removed to make room for something else besides the forest. And given all the benefits we talked in the first part, you will probably wonder, why are we having this problem? Or why would people go and deforest those areas? So here is a pie chart that summarizes the major drivers of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon from 2001 to 2013. So as you can see, the pasture contributes to almost two-thirds of the deforestation areas. So those forests are cleared for pasture land where you could do this like cattle ranching, and then you could produce beef, which is needed in massive amount in other parts of the Brazil country as well as globally. And another agricultural purpose would be the cropland. So about 19% of the deforested areas were used as the cropland, including the small-scale agriculture, which is sustained by the small families, as well as the large-scale commercial farming, which is usually organized or maintained by the companies. So as you can see, this pasture land and cropland contributes to more than 80% of the deforestation that is happening currently. And they also contribute to another shade of grain here, in case you didn't notice. The grass, the crops, they're grain, but they don't really inherit the great biodiversity as well as this like a great power to regulate the climate from the tropical rainforest. So another 9% comes from the fires, as we just answered the question. And those are the wildfires we're talking about here. Those 9% they're usually ignited by the lightning, sometimes just occurred by accident. But the climate change is making the whole environment drier, which and in what circumstances the wildfires tends to get out of control. And for those fires, I just want to mention another thing, which is not just the wildfires are happening in the Amazon region. There are also deforestation-related fires. And those are the fires that are used to prepare the area for the agriculture after we do this clear cutting for the primary forest. And here on the right, you can see this picture which is a picture taken by my Brazilian colleagues in the Amazon region during the year 2019. If you still remember, that's the time in 2019 September, I think that's the time when it actually caught the world's attention again that the Amazon is on fire, and pray for Amazon and everything is all over on the media. And that is because the plume actually, within the certain weather conditions, it was blown all the way to Sao Paulo, where there are a lot of people living there and caused severe air quality problems. And those fires, later on, the scientists studied what are the cause of those fires. Are those like wildfires that we just cannot avoid, or are they somewhat related to the human activities? Well, in the end, when you are looking at the distribution or this like mapping of different fire hotspots, what they found is that they mainly concentrate in the southern part of the Amazon biome, which is in this like intersection between the deforested region and the forest. And so what they come to conclusion is that the deforestation-related fires are mainly responsible for what was happening in 2019. And to make things worse, those human-induced fires can escape beyond intended limits and invade the standing forest. And except for this like just destroying what you have for now, they were also kind of like gradually taking away the forest that is further away from the agriculture land. So we still have one part that is not touched, which is the others. That's the mysterious others and what I call the significant others. So there are various like human activities associated with this, and I group them into two parts. One is the hydropower dams and the road construction. So those two would cause some direct forest loss through the building process, whether it's the flooding of the forest caused by the dam or just the clearing of the forest to make room for the road. But what is even more important is the deforestation provoked by the associated development later on. When you have a dam and you would have all kinds of business coming to support it as well as benefiting from it, and so is the road. So those forest loss were not fully taken into account of when we were calculating this pie chart. And there is another group, which I call the slow killer, is the gold mining and the urbanization. So those processes, although they were not happening everywhere, but they were posing another layer of the problem, which is the water pollution and the soil pollution. As you can see, those gold mines, and they're rich with this like mercury waste in this like mining or like kind of purifying process. And for the urbanization for the cities, you can think about, well, they don't have a very good wastewater treatment plant, and a lot of the wastewater would be directly just sent into the rivers. And those processes, although they are not occupying more spaces, but they are gradually, like slowly poisoning the soil and the water, and slowly kill the forest around them. So those significant other causes, together with the agriculture purposes, the pasture, crop, and the wildfires, they're posing extreme stress onto the tropical rainforest. And as I said before, it's never a one-way road. The deforestation process also affects the climate change. We talked about the three major pathways of how the tropical rainforest would interact with the climate. And here we will look one by one to understand how this deforestation would pose this climate impact. So first, so the carbon reservoir, when you're burning or you're just simply cutting out the trees, you will release all the carbon stored in the living plants. And sometimes through the burning process, and some carbon stored in the soil will also be emitted to the atmosphere. And the second part is this less powerful weather engine. when you replace the primary forest with some like grassland or pasture land or cropland, the transpiration process is not going to be as strong. So you have less amount of water vapor that is supplied to the atmosphere, and that will resulting in a regional decrease of precipitation. Not only in the Amazon region, but also outside of the Amazon region and sometimes in the breadbasket of the South America. And for this washing machine, it's also going to be out of service here. When you're emitting atmospheric pollutants from those like fires or those like urban industrial plants, and that will turn this washing machine into a smoke reactor. You are overwhelming this washing machine, and at one point it will initiate other chemical reactions, actually the chemical chain reactions, which would cycling those pollutants again and again. So it has this like devastating climate impacts from this deforestation, and the scientists are working really hard through different platforms trying to help understand what is changing in this like complex and delicate region, which is the tropical rainforest. So we've got different platforms, including the satellite, aircraft, as well as the ground site. So they would provide coverage at different temporal and spatial resolution. We will just take a brief look at them one by one. So for the satellite, it serves as a great monitoring and alert tool. When the satellite is flowing by the rainforest, it would take pictures, and when you compare the current picture with the previous ones, you will know which part is shifting, and those changing parts are indicated by the red either dots or the big chunk here. And when you go back to look at the original satellite images, you can see that there is a difference between those areas and the surrounding forest. And then with some like experience studying, looking at those satellite images, and also some background information, you can associate it with different causes, such as the small-scale agriculture, which could be more scattered, and the large-scale agriculture, tends to be this like a big chunk or big rectangular that is happening that you can see from the satellite images. And if you see some like fine lines that goes along the way, and that is typically some like logging roads where people are just simply cutting the trees along the way. And for the gold mining, it usually spans across the water system, so it kind of impacts this massive area, but it's slightly different than the small-scale agriculture. So that is a very helpful way in terms of monitoring the deforestation, and actually it helped to take the records of this deforestation since 1988. But the satellite has its own limitation, which is the spatial resolution cannot reach very fine level. Actually, it has trouble to seeing anything within 1 kilometers. So all the things you're seeing here is usually about a few hundred kilometers wide. And then we've got a complementary tool, which is the aircraft. You can equip the aircraft with different instruments, and people would be able to work on them, and the aircraft is extremely helpful in terms of doing this profiling through the atmosphere. So this profiling is simply just like taking the snapshots at different locations. What is showing here on the right is just the flying route of the researching airplane. So you're taking one snapshot here and then going back and take another snapshot here. So as the aircraft flew away, you could take the air samples and do the real-time measurement. So then you would know for your interested chemical species, what is the concentration and how does it evolve over time and over space. So this is very helpful, especially for those like wildfire or the biomass burning studies, and you see how those plumes actually got transported and dispersed along the way. And to even zoom in a little bit to look at the single point is what I call the science at a finer resolution. We do the measurements at the ground site as well. So here what you see is the Musa Tower. It's located in Manaus. It's about 60 meters high. We have about like hundreds of those towers in the Amazon region right now. So they could provide us long-term measurement both for physical and chemical properties of the forest, so we can understand how the rainforest is responding to the climate change by just looking at different temperatures, what is the emission rate, and so on. And the towers is more like doing experiments in the field with the nature. If you're interested in projecting the future to see if we increase the CO2 concentration by another 50 ppm, what is going to happen to the plants? If we increase the temperature by another 5 degrees C, what is going to happen to the plants? And that's what people would do in those like a small chambers or those like a bubble dome. And in those regions, you can change the conditions easily and see how the specific plant reacts. And for our group specifically, we focus on to extending this like a single point measurement in the ground site by using unmanned aerial vehicles. So as you can see here is the relatively the largest unmanned aerial vehicles that produced by DJI, and we would put different low-cost sensors on board, and then it would serve as this kind of like a mobile platform which would go through beyond the ground site, beyond the tower, beyond the boat which we were on, and to take measurements along the way. So all those things, there are a lot of fascinating technologies that are applied to the measurement in the Amazon rainforest that aiming to help us better understand what is happening in the tropical rainforest and what is the future of the tropical rainforest in this context of global climate change. So with that, I would like to wrap up for the second part. Here we talked about the deforestation in the Amazon, and we talked about its major drivers, and behind all of them is actually this purpose of economical development, whether you are raising cows or raising cattle, or whether you are planting those crops. Those are for the economic sake. And the climate impacts of the deforestation can be devastating in and out of the Amazon because of this complicated but delicate interaction between the tropical rainforest and the global climate. And the scientists are doing all kinds of studies at different scales to advance the understanding of the current changes as well as the future impacts. And hopefully that would provide some guidance to the future policymakers to better protect the Amazon rainforest. All right, so I'm ready to take any questions if you've got any.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Channing. Please type your questions in the chat if you have them. If you're on Zoom, you could also unmute and speak as well. I already got a few questions, but please keep typing them. So one of them is, are there ways to restructure a forest so that fires don't spread as rapidly?
I think what I've learned is, I'm not sure if it is implemented in the tropical rainforest region, but what I've learned from previous studies in other regions where people would just simply cut some of the trees down so that it doesn't burn, because the trees are a very great burning material. So I think what it did in reality would be like just cutting off a region where the fire wouldn't spread. But that is a way that you're doing just after it's already burning. And in terms of restructuring the rainforest when it's not burning to prevent it from this wildfires, I don't think there is a very great way to do that exactly. But keeping the climate to be humid would definitely help. We've found some kind of this drastic severe droughts in the year 2010 and 2015, and though in those years when it's extremely dry and the wildfires tend to kind of extend going out of control. So if you could kind of create this like even more humid climate for the rainforest, I guess that would help to control and mitigate the wildfires. But for I guess there is not a single way that you could restructure the rainforest, which is such a complicated system composed of thousands and hundreds of thousands of species. It's very hard to do any engineer on this except for protecting it, I think.
Thank you so much for that answer. All right, there's another one. Is it harder for the forest to recover from gold mining than from the fires?
Yes. The short answer is yes, because this like a wildfire is actually kind of a natural process that is happening. So if there is no other human factors, if it's just a pure wildfire, in just like we mentioned in the previous section, in about 10 to 20 years, you would have the secondary forest growing out of it. So it's easier to recover, and even some of the plants, what I read before in the National Geographic, is that you need those fires for a certain like seeds of the plants to actually sprout. So the wildfires, if in an like appropriate or acceptable range, is actually good for the rainforest to actually renew the trees and everything. But for the gold mines, like I talked before, it poses this problem for the soil and the water's pollution. So they would kind of make a bigger trouble here, because all those like pollutions will not be easily cured or like cleaned up, and they will have this like a profound impact on different kind of species, not only the trees, not only the forest, but also the animals living in them. So I would say yes, wildfire is if we have to choose a way to destroy the rainforest, I guess the rainforest would appreciate if we go with the wildfires where he or she could possibly survive in another 10 to 20 years. But for the gold mines, there is a lot of unknowns, and all those toxics could be in there for centuries.
Wow, that's crazy and devastating. All right, I have another question. Is keeping humans out of the Amazon the best way to protect the Amazon, or are there ways in which humans are actually helping the forest?
Um, there are indigenous people living in those regions. So keeping human out of the Amazon, I'm not sure if that is the right answer. I guess keeping the indigenous people living in their way where they would interact with the Amazon, and they would also provide this like a biodiversity, and they could also like be our guide to understand the tropical rainforest even better. And in terms of this urbanization and all kinds of this really great things for economical development, I guess that is a problem for that is kind of like in this conflict with preserving the Amazon rainforest. But we can certainly create other ways, such as the ecotourism, which I will introduce later on, and in the third part about what we can do to make a difference in protecting this Amazon rainforest or the tropical rainforest broadly. We could develop other ways that is more of like a sustainable development or more sustainable production. We can get something from the tropical rainforest, but in a better way, not this kind of like a destructive way that we are doing at this moment. So we can have some people visiting there, we can have scientists there, we can have indigenous people living there, or other ways people are living there in a more eco-friendly way. Yeah.
That makes sense. It's probably more realistic. All right, this is the last question we have, but if there's others, you should type them now. Otherwise, we'll have to wait after break. This is how long are the experiments with the bubbles where you could play with the temperature and the carbon dioxide? I think it's referring to the little domes you showed where you could change the temperature and carbon dioxide. How long do those experiments take?
Usually for those field campaigns, we would do for a few months. But for those like plants, depending on the lifespan of the plants, you would want to see it as like a whole lifespan, and so sometimes it could be extended to years if you're interested in the different how the plants would react to the temperature and the CO2 concentration change at its different life stage. So depending on the scientific purposes you're working on, it could dispense from any time between several months to several years.
That's super cool. Awesome. Well, I guess thank you. We'll just take 2 minutes again, and then we'll be back at 7:22 for the third and final part. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Everybody, this is going to be the third and final part of our talk. I think we're going to learn a little bit about how we can contribute to save the Amazon, so I'm really excited. That's all yours, Channing.
Yeah, thanks, Jose. And you're absolutely right. We will, in this final part, we'll talk about what can we do to make a difference in terms of protecting the tropical rainforest. So before I enter this part, I want to talk about this concept of like a tipping point, and to tell you about something why this is of like extreme urgency and importance at this moment to protect the tropical rainforest. So we are closer to a tipping point, and I will introduce this concept. What is a tipping point? So it indicates it is a point where a series of small changes or incidents finally becomes significant enough and cause a larger, more important change. And in the context of Amazon, it's when the rainforest biomes become so unstable, and that the region would swiftly transform into the dry, either scrubland or the savanna, which is simply a mixed woodland-grassland ecosystem. It's a downgraded ecosystem, by the way. And the reason why there is tipping point existing is because of this complex climate system has the positive feedback. Just thinking about this whole cycle, I will walk you through this. If we get tree loss, which is a deforestation as a start, and that will lead to less evaporation and transpiration through the trees, which will then lead to decrease the rainfall based on this like one weather engine cycle that we talked about before. And the less rainfall means we have longer and drier dry seasons, and the less humidity in the atmosphere will increase the chances where the wildfires arises. And then more wildfires, more tree loss. So this whole cycle actually closes itself, and it just goes on and on. And at one point, we will lose more trees without even cutting them. If the rainforest cannot hold enough of the water vapor and to supply the atmosphere around it. And so how will that affect us? All the methods or the mechanisms that we talked about before, this carbon reservoir, this weather engine, and this washing machine, when they're not functioning well during the deforestation, they will be completely out of service or like dysfunctioning when we reach this like tipping point. And if just by looking at how this weather engine is going to work, if they were completely gone, all the tropical rainforest in the Amazon, in the Central Africa, and the Southeast Asia, and they will cause the redistribution of the water vapor in the different parts of the world. So here, what you're looking at is that the this kind of like a three tilde signs means that decrease the rainfalls, and there's like a droplets means to increase the rainfalls. And you can see that, let's take Amazon as an example. If the Amazon rainforest were completely gone, you will see an even drier California. And what does that mean? You will have even more wildfires than what we have in the past few years. And then in the East Coast, you will possibly have somewhat just they have like this the redistribution of the water vapor, not only in the tropical region, but also in the Northern Hemisphere. And they could cause this like weird tilting of this like a water vapor distribution, and in some regions you would see like even the increased rainfalls, which was directed from other parts of the world. So if this is a really kind of like worrisome scenario, and I'm not here to scare you away, just like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. What I want to tell you is that the world's attention really helps in protecting the tropical rainforest. And here is the annual deforestation rate in the Brazilian Amazon. And at every peak along the way, there are scientists or the like world's attention from the media or the governmental or any actions or some actions from the government initiatives that actually helped. And you can see that within each time slot or the time period where it attracts the world's attention and it got this pressure, the deforestation rate could actually go down. And the most significant one would be what happened in 2004, and when this action plan for the prevention and control of deforestation in the legal Amazon was launched. And so they covered different axes of actions, including this like a better land planning, better environmental monitoring, as well as fostering some sustainable production. And all those activities together were able to drop the deforestation rate down to an historical record low in 2002. But now, with the new administration and with all these concerns for the economical development, this deforestation rate is rising up again. It's seeing this uptick in the past few years. So we do need to act now before we reach or before we hit that tipping point. And how exactly can we help? Well, every little effort counts, considering that the climate is a kind of interconnected system. Anything that you can do to prevent global warming, to protect the planet, would help for the rainforest. And more specifically, let's look at the causes. We know that about 2/3 of the deforestation was happened because we want to do the cattle ranching. And if we could consume less beef, and that would mean we will have less demand, and demands determines this kind of like supply, we would have less deforestation for pasture or the new pasture land. And we could also consume less wood and paper, and that would decrease the deforestation for logging. Not specifically for the rainforest, but for the temporal forest and the boreal forest, which are primarily used for wood and paper. That could save them from that as well. And once you keep those carbon, they are also served as carbon reservoirs. Once you keep those carbon reservoirs, they could take their responsibility to take in the CO2 and prevent global warming together with their partners, which is the tropical rainforest. And another way is to help with this like sustainable development. You can't just like cut off the economical development and saying that when we are living a high standard of life and we ask the people living in those rainforest regions to live a poorer life as they were like hundreds of years ago. But what we can do to help is to help develop this like a sustainable tropical economies. And one way to do that would be ecotourism. We could contribute to that area through tourists, through this like a touring, which will not kind of like cut off or destroy the rainforest. It could preserve it for the sake of tourism, and also kind of like contribute to the economy in a way that is sustainable. And there are also some other things that we can do to help, including holding the politicians and corporations accountable, because they are the ones who can make the decision whether they're using the beef from the rainforest, the pasture land, or whether they're using the soybeans from the deforested croplands. And there are also numerous NGOs that could really use your help, including the Rainforest Alliance, Rainforest Trust, Amazon Watch, Rainforest Action Networks. They're doing all kinds of things. They're holding different events and trying to unite more power so that we could actually do something to protect the rainforest. So accept the word, and remember what I said before, that the climate is interconnected in a very complicated way, and a little thing would help. At today, which is April 14th, the Earth Day is just 8 days away. So this year's the theme for the Earth Day is Restore the Earth. There will be various events happening during the during the course of the Earth Day. So don't forget to check out the earthday.org to see if there is any events that you could contribute starting from this year, starting from this week. And also, the President Biden will invite 40 world leaders to a leaders summit on climate on the same day, on the Earth Day. So check out to learn more about how you can help and what countries are doing to help with the climate change. So with that, I would like to wrap up this entire talk. So we talked about the tropical rainforests, which are of great value to the earth, to our daily life, and to the global climate. And then we move on to looking at the shifting trends caused by deforestation, which is driven by the economic development. It poses a high price on the climate change as well. And we ended with something like the action atoms. We really need to act now before it is too late. And remember, every little effort counts. So start doing something, and you can help with protecting the tropical rainforest. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing talk. Everybody, please ask questions if you want to. This is going to be the end of our talk. But I'll start asking some of the ones that we already got. One is, can you talk more about your research in particular? Do you travel to the Amazon and use data from the Amazon?
Yes. So in 2019, I actually spent about like 37 days in the Amazon region. So what the research that we did specifically was to use the unmanned aerial vehicles like I showed before, and we put all kinds of low-cost sensors on board of the UAVs and then fly it along the Amazon River, which is the biggest river in that region. And what we are doing there is trying to study the specific phenomenon called the river breeze. So the river breeze is when you have the cooler river surface and the hotter land surface, and that would induce this like air circulation in those regions. And we are trying to understand how this kind of circulation, how those like local circulations at micro scales would interact or would impact this transport or the dispersion of the pollutant in those areas. So that is a little bit different from the deforestation that we're talking about today, but it also lies in this like a big picture of understanding how the human activities and the nature interact with each other in those interesting tropical rainforest regions.
That is very cool. Another question is kind of related. Are the scientists that work in the Amazon mostly local? If not, do they bring funding from their own countries or institutions to help with the growth in these regions?
Yes, that's a very good question. So starting from the 1970s or 1980s, early 1980s, scientists from all over the world started to come into Amazon and to help in terms of the technology as well as the funding support. So our group specifically, we started to working in Amazon started in 2008. So there are those kind of like really big, large scale field campaigns, which is in collaboration with hundreds of institutes, universities globally. So they would send in the scientists as well as their instruments, and they would operate in the field. And through this process, we have a better understanding of what is happening in the Amazon rainforest. And what is more important is that we could provide this coaching to the local people. For us, we were collaborating with the Amazonas State University, which is located in Manaus, in the center of the in the central Amazon. So we are collaborating with them. So they were there all year around, and we would travel there maybe once or twice a year to do this intensive field campaigns. So this has been a very fruitful and beneficial, mutual beneficial process for both for this like scientific advance, as well as this kind of like a mentoring or this like a teaching or this like nurturing experience for the local people.